This is the moment we've been waiting for. A time in human history where exponential technologies have rendered the world more virtually connected, more empowered, and more informed than ever before. Yet, we're still suffering. A lot. So how do we make the most of our modern tools to amplify and connect with what truly matters? To light the way, I've asked some friends to join us around the proverbial fire to share stories of discovering their purpose hidden within life's winding path and to explore the future we really want. Let's meet where community, technology, and ancient wisdom converge. 6 months ago, I set a goal to create and share 10 episodes this year that would bridge 10 normally disconnected fields of expertise exploring community, technology, and ancient wisdom. And we did it. I believe deeply within this trinity lies our hope for creating a future we are proud to pass on to our children. Today, I am excited to share with you episode 10, where the sacred meets science. 2020 has been a challenging year, to put it lightly. It's been messy, chaotic, isolating, and transformational. Today's guest brings us into the lab where religion, science, and humanity converge. Jonathan Weitzman is a professor, published author, and scientist who explores the mysteries bundled in the human genome through the emergent field of epigenetics. He's also a devoted husband, father, and Jew. I met Jonathan in 2017 as his coach, helping him to prepare his first TEDx talk at a technical university just outside of Paris. In this episode, Jonathan humbly shares his problem with purpose, how he breaks convention to blend work and personal life, mingling research with tradition. He believes in decompartmentalizing knowledge so that various truth found in places like sacred text can inspire more grounded, holistic innovation. As honored in Judaism, he keeps a relationship with the past to build a better future. This one is for anyone interested in exploring a more integrated approach to science and human evolution. Please welcome Jonathan Weitzman.
So I'm a geneticist, and geneticists and genetics is interested in something relatively simple that interests all of us, which is what do we pass to the next generation? So explaining that to my kids is relatively easy because my kids are, even from a very young age, acutely aware that they have bits of them that are like dad and bits of them that are like mum, physically and personality. And I guess everyone always thinks, where do I get the different bits of me? And so you get half of them from your mother and half of them from your father. And what we're trying to understand, what genetics, since all the way back to Gregor Mendel, is trying to ask a relatively simple but old question, which is, what is transmitted from one generation to another, and how do we, what do we carry from our two parents, and how do they combine to give the uniqueness that is of each of us, and that we will then transmit to our children. And now we understand, since the massive amount of work in the 20th century, we now understand that in very molecular terms. And that beautiful spiral of the DNA is part of that explanation of what we transmit to our children and why we are the way we are. These are they're sort of basic old questions. What makes us who we are? And where does it come from? And what do we get from our parents? And what do we transmit to the next generation? And so we'll see what we're going to talk about that, but that's probably permeates lots of different aspects of my life. But that's what geneticists study, and that's what I teach, and that's what I try to study in the lab. Just a tiny bit of that big question about how characteristics are transmitted and expressed, and the stability of those transmissions.
So that's the question of genetics, is what are we transmitting from one generation to the next? I want to ask you, perhaps it's the same answer, but what is the question at the heart of your work?
I ran for 10 years a research institute, and the institute is called epigenetics, and it sounds scary, but it's just a part of genetics. So epigenetics and cell fate, or in French, épigénétique et destin cellulaire. I don't know which one sounds better. So what we're trying to understand is how. So all the cells of your body have the same DNA, they have the same genetic material, and yet all the cells of your body have different behaviors and different, what we call, identities. And so deep in much of my work, whether it's in the lab or in the classroom or out of the lab, is about understanding identity and understanding how the role that the genetic material plays in defining identity and how identities change over time. So I think these questions, they're sort of fundamental questions almost of man, right? How do we get to be like we are? Where did my identity come from? Why are all my cells different? How different are all my cells? So these are sort of questions that I cannot give a moment where I said, I'm going to be a biologist. I can give you a moment, an interesting moment. So I'm a twin, and I think that had a profound effect on the way I think about the world, but also the way I've managed my career, because identical twins have the same genome and yet they're different. And so from probably I wouldn't have articulated it at 7 on the playground, but probably from the youngest of ages, I've been fascinated where identities come from.
So identity is certainly a big topic right now in the world, and mainly culturally, ethnically, racially, and how we segment ourselves in our locations around the world. Do you feel like there is something to be gleaned or something significant in understanding how similar we are in our genome? I think I'm remembering the 3 billion,
yes,
compared to the nearly 3 million, the nucleotides that are different, of the 3 billion that are the same, or we have almost 2 billion.
Yeah, so we have 3 billion letters in our genome, the genome being the sum of all the genes that you got from your parents. So you actually got 2 copies, one from each parent. And what we realized was that only a tiny number of those letters are different between any of us. So you and I, because we're of different sexes, have one chromosome that's different, but actually there are very few genes on the Y chromosome, the one I have, and the rest of our genome is extremely similar. So the differences that make us individual, that make us all unique, is just a result of chance, okay, which is hard for most people to deal with, but it is just chance, just tiny errors, if you want to call them errors, or differences. So imagine an enormous text, and in which just the change of a few letters completely changes the meaning of the text in a few sentences, but those sentences can have a big consequence, and that's what makes us different. And so what should we focus? Should we focus on how much we have in common, or how much we have that differentiates us? Is it more important that what makes me unique, or is it more important than how much I have in common with you or anyone else in the world? And that's a philosophical question, but that has a big impact on the way society works. And we have a big tendency to focus on what makes us unique, because it's fascinating how unique we are. But at the same time, that encourages us to forget how much we have in common. For example, your country is struggling a lot about differences in skin color. That's a tiny part of who we are, is skin color, and it can be explained by a few proteins from a few genes, and yet it has a massive difference on the way society interacts with you and the way you interact with each other. So, and I struggle with, just like everyone, with finding people who are more similar to me because they're my group, and not wanting that group to forget how similar it is to all the other people out there. So we're all struggling with this, and we could use genetics to. So now we're in an era where we have access to this genetic information, so we can see in letter by letter how similar or different we are from each other. And how will that help us? Will that help us will we look only at the 1% that makes it less than 1%, 0.1% that makes us different? Or will we look at the other 99% and say, wow, look how much we have in common?
Sounds like some version of the negativity bias, but like the differentiation bias or like unique bias. Yeah. So Jonathan, thank you for giving us a little bit of a context around mainly genetics. Before I move into one other really big part of your life, I wanted to just ask, and I think I asked this of you back in the day, but I feel like it still wants to crop up, which is epigenetics, adding that epi at the beginning of genetics, does that call to question the difference between nature and nurture? Epi calling in the context, the environment, the raising and rearing and education and experience. Is that correct?
So let me just try to explain what epigenetics is, because everyone has their own idea.
You did write a book about it too.
So I did write, yeah, I've written, yeah. And I have a new project which is going to be published in October, which is an encyclopedia of identity, which we can come back to in a minute. But I'm going to explain to you what epigenetics might be, how epigenetics might be explained. So epigenetics is a word that was first coined in the 50s by a Scottish researcher called Conrad Waddington, who was actually he's not Scottish, but he was working in Scotland, in Edinburgh, and he was interested in what we call today developmental biology. That process of how we go from one cell to this fantastic, beautiful, multicellular structure that is us. And how that process of differentiation, how we go from one cell with almost no identity to hundreds of cells with different identities. And he proposed that the word epigenetics should be used to explore this process of developmental biology, where the genome was expressed in different ways depending on the historical path that each cell or each genome had taken. And so the epi meaning above the genome or the genetics. And it was also a little bit of a pun or a word play on epigenesis, which is an ancient concept that form emerges over time by the interaction between components. Okay, going back to Aristotle. Okay, so today we think of epigenetics as a series of systems and pathways that might explain how the genome is used in different ways, and how information that is not written in the genome can be transmitted from one cell to another, maybe even from one generation to another. And that information carries in some way a memory of the history of the interactions of that cell or that genome with everything around it. So it's not as simple as, you eat broccoli and that affects your genome. But eating broccoli or any, the way we live probably interacts with our genetic material and may leave traces. So this is it's a beautiful idea that we are the sum, not just of the information that we got from our two parents, but of other information that we accumulate throughout our lives and that we may even in some way transmit to our children. And so it does raise, you said, the question of nature nurture, which was posed in a scientific way 100 years ago. and still remains, I think it's the question of the 21st century will be how to understand this complex equilibrium between nature, which is presumably the genome that's inherited, and nurture, which is the environment in which we live. And it's not you can't put a percentage on it. It's a complex interaction because we also impact our environment, and we're seeing that in a massive way. We impact our environment by the food that we eat and the way that we live and the pollution that we produce, and that it's a constant feedback. And this is, we keep going round. It's all about a continual redefining of identity by thinking about what it is that I received and what I interact with. So in my lab we study this in the most detailed, mechanistic, molecular way. But I think about it all the time in lots and lots of different contexts. So.
There's a whole other context that I know is a part of your life and informing you, perhaps personally, perhaps professionally, which is your faith. And I listened to one of your talks before we got to talk today, and I listened to it actually even years ago. I can't believe it's almost been a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And you're drawing a comparison. Well, first you're using the metaphor of the genome as a book, the book you inherit, the book of life. And then you're comparing this book to the Bible and the story of Adam and Eve. And you're comparing the love as the overarcher of these three books: the Bible, Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, and the genome. And so something that I find particularly unique about you is your willingness to use the word love, to make that a piece of your work. And I want to bring in something that you shared with me about your fascination with, and honestly, you're a voracious learner. Every time I talk with you, I have a list. It's just like a laundry list of things I have to research and learn about, and it's amazing. When we first met, you wanted help with one thing in particular. You did make me promise to not help you turn your TEDx talk into a one-size-fits-all TED speaker robot situation. We had to start there. I assured you, no, that wasn't my intention. And in fact, we got to one word in particular that you wanted to explore. Do you remember that word?
Vulnerability. Now,
why on earth would a scientist be interested in exploring vulnerability? What was your interest there? What's the call? And we will come back to faith. It relates.
I think I'm concerned about compartmentalization of different aspects of identity, personal identity. And this idea that when I'm at work, I'm a certain Jonathan Weitzman, and when I'm at home, I'm a different Jonathan Weitzman, and that all these aspects have to be compartmentalized, and that as a scientist, I am an objective and cold and calculated, and yet at home I'm a father and a son and a husband, and then I have many. I mean, we all have many aspects of our lives, and I'm concerned. And this goes very deep. I'm concerned about the compartmentalization of knowledge. That we are forced to choose from very young age whether we're going to be science or arts, and then in science between the hard sciences and the soft sciences, and then within biology, am I a molecular biologist or a microbiologist or a geneticist? And I refuse all these definitions. I don't want to be put in a box. This is I don't know why it's such a concern of mine, but I do not want to be put in a box. And because everything is much more fluid. Everything that I do at home influences what I do at work, and so I'm concerned that science is taught as objective truth and facts, and that's not the way I teach science. When I teach science, it's not about objective truth and it's not about facts. I'm much more interested in the people that generated this knowledge, and that these people have feelings and historical contexts, etc. So I want to put the scientists back into the science in many, and this it hits lots of parts of what I try to do, and realize that science is done by people, and that the type of science people do depends on the type of people they are, and that when I go on stage as TEDx as a scientist, I'm also a person, and I wanted to find a way to show a bit of that person, because the science talk without understanding the person behind the science is robbed of something of its beauty and of its humanness. And so I think it's important to bring the person and the people back into the science, and that means being a little bit vulnerable. And I think it makes science more interesting and more enriching. And I think that's where I didn't want to go on stage and give a lecture about epigenetics, which I do. But even when I give a lecture about epigenetics, and you helped me, so I couldn't have given that talk about love as a scientist without the work that we've done together. So I thank you for that, because I think if I look back and try to articulate, I think I wanted to show all of me, not just not just the Professor Jonathan Weitzman. And that's what I wanted to do on the TED stage, is show a little bit more, not everything, but a little bit more. Yeah.
I really appreciate that. I don't want to comment on what you're saying because I have my own biased opinions about it all. And frankly, what you're saying speaks perfectly for itself. So I just want to say thank you for answering the question. And now I would love to ask, would you tell us just a little bit about how your Jewish faith plays a role in your life? What does it bring to your life? And do you allow it to come into all areas, or what's your relationship, especially coming off of what you just said with compartmentalization, which I think was exceptionally astute. And it is, I will say it is one of my biggest concerns in the world right now, is this compartmentalization of knowledge and skill sets, where we've got this oil and vinegar situation where science and technology, which has so much influence and so much power, rightfully, and then you've got this, we'll call that IQ space, and we've got the EQ space and the soft skills, and frankly, we could just as well say masculine, feminine, and one of the in its archetypal sense, and in the sense of logic, and I will be using poetic association here. So of course there will be exceptions to what I'm saying, but something that is at the heart of this project, this Path and Purpose project, and the reason why I pull in community, technology, and ancient wisdom is to create a trinity between these: the human connection, the mind, and the heart. And that with all of those combined, there's wise living. There's a real chance at a future, and a real chance at a future I'd actually feel comfortable bringing children into. It's a very personal mission, and it's that real as well. I'm not going to beat around the bush. We're at a pretty critical moment on Earth, and we don't have really time to be polite or try to keep things separate anymore, or compartmentalized, as you put it. So that also brings to question, we're on we're a very complex species with a ton of different interests and ways of surviving. And I studied cultural anthropology. I am in love with culture. That's a big part of what brings beauty to my life, is simply, whether it's the Middle Eastern folk dance I did in college, or living in France and speaking to people in this other language that I find exquisite, though I bumble through it grammatically, or, you know, getting to speak with people from various spiritual backgrounds or religious backgrounds who are coming to life with something greater than themselves in mind. And thank you for listening to all that, but that is what's in my heart behind the question of, you're Jewish. How does that play a role in your life? Small question.
So, yeah. So you use the word faith. Let's put faith aside, okay? Being Jewish for me, and again, it's very personal. I think everyone has their own idea of what their religion brings them. And I'm not, so religion has done some terrible things in the world, or some terrible things in the world have been done in the name of religion, and religion has encouraged some terrible things, but it's also done some wonderful things. And for me, it's a very personal, so any religious expression is very, so what I'm going to say is very personal. It doesn't represent anyone or any stream of religious involvement or commitment. For me, it brings and it answers, it addresses some of these issues that you mentioned. I think the most important thing is connectedness. So the only reason I'm Jewish is because my mother was Jewish, and the only reason she's Jewish is because her mother was Jewish. And so it's a connection with, I like your term, ancient wisdom. It is a connection with ancient wisdom. And I think it's really important. So as much as I live in today's technological world and I study molecular biology at work, I feel a connection with what you call ancient wisdom, or an ancient world. And the feeling of connectedness is really important in a world in which there's a crisis of connection, and everyone feels a little bit disconnected. So the anchoring in a connection that goes back centuries, and it doesn't even matter how, it's not that interesting to me to get into a polemic about the authenticity of the origins of the fact is that I have a connection with something that seems to have existed for centuries and centuries, and that has a rich memory of all those of all that history. And so it's a connection with the past and a connection with the future, because Judaism puts a massive guilt trip on transmission to the next generation. So this idea that we are the weak link, and the responsibility of being a link with the past and the future. So as a Jewish father of Jewish children, this is very important. I feel that there's a responsibility of transmission and of connection, and connecting the future through my kids with the past through my parents and grandparents. And then there's a connection with community in a world in which in a Western world that struggles with what we mean by community. And in French, we have communautarism, which has a very negative connotation. But the fact that I can feel a connection with other people is very grounding and very reassuring. For example, I can step into a synagogue anywhere in the world. It can be, and I've done this, it can be in New Delhi, it can be in Bangkok, it could be in, California, and feel connected, partly because we have a shared liturgy and a shared history and a shared culture, and there's an immediate connection. And again, should we focus on the differences or the similarities? So that connection is very privileged, but all of us are just searching for a way to be connected. If I can be connected with a certain group of people, of a size and a scale that is manageable humanly, then I feel a bit more connected, and those people are connected to more people, and somehow I feel grounded and a little bit less lost. All that without mentioning, I didn't mention the word God once, right? So God adds another level of connectedness. But even without that level of connectedness, there's a value in the connection to history, past and future, and the connection with a shared culture that is global.
I'm thinking to your talk again, and we don't need to use the word God. I will use a different word that represents pretty much the same thing for me, which is love. Love as the connector. Love as the big Wi-Fi signal that we all plug into that animates everything. You talk about the shape of the heart and how there is no beginning, no end. The end is the beginning. It's all connected. And in this, what you're talking about of bringing grounding, reassurance, connectedness by reaching back so that you can go forward. You know, there are a lot of companies right now going through extreme levels of change. Massive, rapid, very, very confusing and disorienting. And so one of the first things that a company can do if they want to help make sure to stay resilient in massive change is make sure that they identify what isn't changing. What are the control pieces? What stays the same? Where's our ground? Whether that's your values or your client base or a problem you're solving or your vision for the future, whatever that is. So I just want to say yes to connectedness, and also as a potential antidote to this difficulty you're talking about of compartmentalization at work. Do you have one moment in your life or a time where you realized you were at work and you hadn't separated things, and there was a moment when Judaism or your sense of connection to this old world or your knowledge of ancient text, that it showed up and it guided the way in any way?
Yes, so you know that France is very attached to what is called in French laïcité, to the idea that the separation of church and state, which actually didn't come from a relationship with the Muslim world or with the Jewish world. It actually came from a relationship with the Christian world. So it was about Christian power in a Christian country. But there is a separation of church and state, which is very, very strong. And this works. And the idea is that you can do what you want when you're at home, but when you're in a public place, you are an enfant de la République. You are a child of the Republic, which is laïque. And if you want to, religion is something you do at home. And this works, I think it works for Christianity. I think part of the problem that France is going through at the moment is it doesn't work very well for Islam and for Judaism, because these are not religions that you leave at home. They're religions that you carry with you everywhere, and that have external signs of that, which poses a problem to this secular French culture. And so when I go to work, I'm supposed to leave my religion at home, and I rediscover it when I come home after work. And that's the way that French culture is structured. And it's an important part of French culture, because it means that we have a neutral space in which we can all interact, independent of any religious conviction. And that it was originally so that we don't impose our religion on other people. So I am encouraged that when I go to work, I'm supposed to leave it all at home. But I can't. So when I go to work and we go out for lunch, I'm reminded of my identity every moment, because there are things that I eat and things that I don't eat. And I can't ignore it. It's every meal has that, every interaction, and then it's present all the time, whether it's stated or not, whether I wear a kippah or I don't wear a kippah, it's still there. So, and I have decided not to suppress it, to just let it come out when it comes out. In France, a generation ago, French Jews had two names: a name at home, often a Jewish name, and a name that they used at work. Okay. My wife has two names. At home, she's called Tzipora, and at work, she's called Claire. And these are two identities and two personalities, and they cohabit, but they have different places. And that's fine, having different places, but just as long as we're aware that they're intermixing or interfacing identities. So I quote the Talmud in my class, but I don't always say where it comes from. And I often quote, I often quote at the end of the semester a question that is in the Mishnah, which is an ancient book of the Talmud, in which the question is asked, who is wise? Okay, the question, there are four questions that are asked, but one is who is rich. But the rabbis ask the question, who is wise? This is in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, which is a book of the Mishnah. So it's a very legal book, and in bits of it are bits of ancient wisdom. So the question is asked, who is wise? And the answer that is given is, he who learns from everybody. And so I thank my students, because I have learned from them just as they have learned from me. And I think, so it's just a little throwaway line, but it permeates who I am. I try to learn from everyone. And as a scientist in the lab, the wonderful thing about experimental biology is that the PhD student, or even the stagiaire, even the intern, the master student, still has, we still have something to learn from them. They can bring something new. It's a very democratic profession. Anyone can make a scientific contribution, the elder and the newcomer. And so just a throwaway line like that, that's what makes you rich, is your ability, what makes you wise is your ability to learn from everybody. I try to make that part of the way I teach. I think that as a teacher, I learn a lot from my students. I also quote another line from the Talmud, which says, I'm trying to translate, from all my pupils I have learned. And I think that's important as a teacher, to learn from everyone. I begin the semester with a slide in which I show a series of arrows. Teacher, student, doctor, patient, journalist, reader, in which I emphasize the fact that in the past, we thought of many activities as unidirectional with an arrow. Teachers give facts or education to students. Doctors give medicine to patients. Journalists give facts or news to readers. But all these arrows are flipping, and the 20th century will be characterized by flipped arrows, that we realize that everything is bidirectional, that teachers learn from students, that doctors, that patients will now bring their own information to the doctor. More and more, they will be a partner in their own treatment or treatment decisions. If you have a Twitter account, you are a journalist and a reader at the same time. So everything becomes bidirectional. And that's because the world is bidirectional. It's not unidirectional arrows. Everything is an interaction in both directions. And so I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, so all the ideas that I have at home that I got from my own parents permeate the way I interact with people and the way I teach and the way I think about teaching. And when I come back, I'm very taken with the idea that biological systems teach us a lot about the world and about our own philosophy about the world. That the genome is extremely similar between all of us emphasizes how much we have in common. That the environment impacts the genome and the genome impacts the environment helps us think about the way our role in the world and our navigation, our journey through the world. So I'm continually inspired by lessons from biology that I bring back into my non-professional world. And I take a bit of my non-professional world and that integrates my life as a scientist. And everything is bidirectional, every interaction.
We're getting close to when I have to let you go. So I need to ask that, much like we're talking about compartmentalization versus connectedness, or heck, Adam and Eve, Romeo and Juliet, genetics or nature, what we're born with, how things are affected. Everything in light is made of these opposing forces and tensions, and it's what births beauty, and it certainly creates a lot of chaos. Jonathan, we've talked about the light sides of your work and some of what having access to an old world can bring: grounding, reassurance, identity, belonging, ability to make sense. And you've got this old and you've got the new of what's emerging, and you're in the excitement of what's emerging and you're a part of that and discovery. This is a time in the world where things are almost cataclysmic. There's so much chaos. There's so much room for beauty, but it's so messy you can hardly see. Imagining an individual, you as a microcosm, a time in your life, whether that's in the past or perhaps right this very moment. Is there something, or was there something you knew you needed to change in who you were or how you were being in order to live the life or create the world you want to live in?
Yeah, so we're living in a very complicated time, but you start from the assumption that mess is bad. You should look at my desk. It's a mess. And I can't even show you. It's horrible. And it depresses me, the mess of my desk, because it's a reflection of the mess of my mind. But from mess, but I really justify that. It's not a reason to not clean my mess, but mess is so important, because in mess, things that you would not have expected to come together come together. And as a scientist, what you're looking for is sudden moments when you see things juxtaposed and you think, wow, there's a connection that I would not have thought of if everything was ordered and compartmentalized.
Yes.
So the first words of Genesis. So again, as a scientist, I turn back to the most ancient of texts. The most ancient of texts, the Hebrew Bible, takes on the biggest challenge in its first sentences by asking where we all came from, where this all came from. Okay, and it's been massively criticized because of the way it does it, but yet it's a very brave thing to take on. If you were writing a book about the world, you would not start with where did it all begin, because you would say, I'm not sure I can answer that question. And yet the Bible says I can't answer it, and I'm going to use ridiculous metaphor. But I'm going to give a text, but we're going to have a text that is going to work for centuries after centuries after centuries. But the text starts with, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. V'hakol hayot tohu va'avu. Everything was, and there's no way to describe the tohu va'avu. We have no translation except a big mess. Okay? So the Bible says the origins of all this order was a big mess. And what a big bang, if you want. A big bang, if you want. A big bang creates a big mess. And, you know, physicists are going to spend years and years and years writing calculations about that, the emergence of the big mess. And then out of the big mess comes two things next to each other, heaven and earth, man and woman, earth and genome and environment. The juxtaposition of all those things, the tension that is life, comes from a big mess. So we are going through a big mess. It's been very hard to live. I've had a terrible time. And partly because I've had to stay at home, and so I don't get all the interactions that I need with the rest of the world. But from this big mess, we'll have juxtaposition of things that we just hadn't thought of, and it'll make us see new connections in a new way. And that will be a source of innovation, just like every mess is a source of innovation, just like every war is a source of innovation. So it is a mess, and that's difficult to deal with, but maybe it's not a bad thing to have mess. So one thing that Judaism is very good with, and that it's integrated into its calendar, is the idea that joy and sorrow are back to back. And it permeates every aspect of Jewish practice. Okay, have you ever been to a Jewish wedding? At a Jewish wedding,
I don't think I have. I've been to many services, but not a Jewish wedding.
You have to go to a Jewish wedding. So at a Jewish wedding, a man and a woman are standing under a canopy.
Yes, and yes.
The canopy is open on all four sides so that everyone can come in and see. And at the peak of their joy, they break a glass. Okay, and then everyone screams, right?
They step on it.
They step on it, yeah. So they break a glass. So why do they break a glass? So there are many explanations. One is that this reminds us of the fragility of human existence. Okay, how fragile human existence is. And the other reason that they break a glass is at the point of maximum joy of community and family, is that they remember a moment of sorrow. So the glass is broken in some way to remind us of the destruction of the temple, okay, 2,000 years ago. That happened actually on this day. So today is the anniversary of the destruction of the first and second temple, okay, the 9th day of the month of Av, which is just now. Okay, so we go, and which is like ultimate sorrow, yeah, and these are combined, and we cite a sentence from the Psalms that say the psalm that starts on the river, by the rivers of Babylon, yeah. So the psalm that starts like that, and it says, if that you have in your moments of joy, you have an obligation to remember sorrow, basically. And yet it's okay. So tears can be tears of joy, you know, in a Jewish wedding, tears of joy and tears of sorrow at the same time, back to back. Everything is back to back. Yeah, we celebrate Yom Kippur, the most solemn day of the year, and 4 days later, we're celebrating the Feast of Sukkot, which is the most joyous day of the year. And we go back and forth, and that's life. That's life. You go, you know, child is born, a grandparent dies, life goes round and round, and you have to be able to incorporate sorrow and joy. And in order to have order, you need to have mess. Mess, my desk is a demonstration. Mess and order are, they're back to back. And a world of only order, we've seen worlds of only order, it's a terrible thing. And a world of only mess is a terrible thing. But the tension between order and mess creates juxtaposition, which creates innovation and new ideas. So I am, despite having lived through a difficult time, and it's not been easy, it has not been easy for my family, and it's not been easy for society and for community, and it's been a terrible challenge for community. Having said that, it's been fascinating, and it will be, I remain relatively optimistic that it will be a source of questioning, which is really important, because if you can't question, you can't live. So we need to be able to question, and we need to be confronted with things that make us ask questions about who we are and how we interact. You know, I'm a hug person, so. And we can't hug now, yeah? So it's tough, and we need to be able to touch. So what does it mean? How do we connect without connecting? How do we're doing this by Zoom? It'd be better if we were in the same room.
I haven't given myself so many hugs in my whole life, because it's been a hard time as well. And I went through a big separation with someone I was with for 4 years. And now to move from that into confinement, it's pretty much like the worst punishment someone could be given.
But separation and reintegration are they're important parts of life. You know, we'll all separate from our parents, and we'll all separate from our kids, and we're, you know, this is cycles of life, and it's painful, and it's okay that it's painful, and it produces tears, and it's okay, and it's always followed. I think the reason the Jewish calendar is like that is to remind us that you know, exile is followed by return, and that separation is followed by coming together again, and that sorrow is followed by joy, which is followed by sorrow, which is followed by joy, and that's life, and we should be able to commemorate and celebrate, if that's the right word, both.
Yes.
Times of sadness. You know, it's really,
yes.
The Jewish community is obsessed by memory, because, and particularly in the 20th century, the word memory has become a symbol of Jewish identity, because there are things that we didn't want to forget. But we should be able to, you know, remember terrible times and celebrate wonderful times, and know that those wonderful times will be followed by terrible times and followed by wonderful times, and that's okay. It's you know, it is a cycle. It is a cycle. We're not plunging. We're going up and down. The only plunging may be the planet warming, which is a bit more frightening. But Judaism gives me, and this is personally, because religion is massively criticized by many people, and by many of my colleagues as well. For me, it gives me optimism, it gives me connection, and I think it helps me to live a better life. And I have no desire to force that on anyone. This is just the culture that I come from. But I do think it's important to try to live a better life.
Yes, to that. So before I ask you the final question, I'm going to sneak in a little tiny one. It's no big deal. No big deal. Do you have a sense, let's say it's 2200, and you're reflecting from another lifetime upon this lifetime, and you go, oh, that's what it was about. Do you have a sense of what your purpose in this lifetime is?
So the problem with purpose is it suggests that there's an objective that we're trying to get somewhere. Yeah? And I think nearly everyone will say at the end of their life, if they're asked to give advice, they'll say, enjoy the journey. So I am struggling with purpose, and I'm struggling with the simplicity of the answers that I get, whether it's from rabbis or scientists, that simplify. I think it's just not simple. It is messy. And I don't think there's a single purpose. I have a purpose as a son, and a purpose as a husband, and a purpose as a father. And I do them all badly. And that's, I hope in your like 200 years, that I'll look back and say, it's okay. You didn't do them perfectly, but it's okay. You did them all. You did lots of messy things together, but you did a lot of things. And hopefully you touched a lot of people. Sometimes, and you never know who you're going to touch, right? So I give classes, there are 50 people. And I always start by asking, why are you here? Because I want to know why you're here so that I can hopefully give you something of, because instead of just giving my lecture, I want to be able to answer some need of the people who are sitting there. And I always say, if there's one person, just one, who goes home tonight and looks up one piece of explores one piece of knowledge, if I gave one person enough curiosity to go and learn one other thing, I've done my job. And that's fine. And I always say that. And I always, I also have given Bible classes, and I used to give a Bible class for women, which is because I thought it was important to have a female voice of interpreting Bible. And I always said, even if there was just one person here, I would still give the class. And one time, only one person turned up. And I said, well, she said, oh, I can go home. And I'm like, no. I said, if there's one person, we're still going to have a class because it's enough for one person. So you never know who it is you touch for whatever reason. And sometimes those people can articulate it. I was talking to my brother yesterday, and he said his kids are very good about telling him what they've learned from him. And mine are very bad. They find it very hard to articulate what it is they've got. But I have no doubt that they have got lots of things from me. So you never know. And I don't want to be trite, but it can be the smile that you give someone on the street. So I walk down the street conscious of the fact that I try and smile at as many people as I can, because it can be as simple as that, as simple as making sure that the person who sells you your bread knows that you treat them as a human being and not as a machine that sells bread. So if I'm looking back 200 years, I hope, I'm all about interaction. That's my driving force in life, is interaction. And I hope that I will look back and say, well, you had a lot of interactions with a lot of different people, and you brought different things to those interactions. And there were ripple effects, some of which you're aware of, most of which you're probably not aware of. And you did your best. I always say to my kids, I don't care what grade you get. If you can tell me I did my best, that's enough. So I'm not doing a great job, but I think I'm probably doing my best. I'm certainly trying to do my best.
Doing our best, certainly words to live by, especially in adverse times, which I don't know if there ever hasn't been, but feels like particularly inflammatory at the moment.
I wonder in the history of the world whether we will look back and, our species has been through some terrible moments. Yeah. So this just feels bad, but it feels bad because we're living here. Is it so much worse than other times?
Much better than the extinction or ice age, I bet.
Exactly.
You know, we still have a fighting chance with this virus. But before we complete that metaphor, I'm getting just an intuitive sense, and I'm going to go with it. I'm going to say, Jonathan, that you in 180 years is just going to give you one word to have as a talisman as you continue interacting with people in this life and moving through the joys and sorrows. Just one word you want to give yourself to continue through.
It'll be interaction. I think that's my key word is interaction. And whether everything, the mess of the ideas on my on my desk or in my brain, it's the use of mess to create interaction. So the word Jew, yeah, comes from the Hebrew word ivri. Do you know this?
No.
No, ivri, like ivrit, which is the language of Hebrew. Hebrew, it comes from ivrit. Ivri became Hebrew because I don't know why the H came in, but so the word for Jew is ivri. The word for Hebrew is ivrit. And where does the word come from? So the word comes from the word ever, okay? And ever means from somewhere else, okay? The identity of Jew, going back to the first Jew is Abraham, and he came me'ever hanahar, from the other side of the river. Okay, he crossed the Euphrates because he wasn't born in Israel. He was born in a city called Ur Kasdim, Ur of the Chaldeans, and he was told by God to leave where he was and to go somewhere else. Okay, and his identity is he is from somewhere else, and being from somewhere else gives you a completely different perspective on everything. And that's why, so someone said to me this week, they said to me, you're lucky, you'll always be a foreigner. And I'm like, well, I'm being forced because of Brexit to take out French nationality. And he said, yeah, but because of your accent, you'll always be a foreigner. And I think what I bring is that I'm from somewhere else, which gives me a different way of looking. So when I go to work, I'm British in a French system. I'm Jewish in a scientific environment. When I come home, I'm bringing so I'm always from somewhere else, which means I'm never really at home, which is Jewish identity down to to the core, is to not be at home, but because you're from somewhere else, to be able to make a unique contribution. And so it's interaction. That's my word.
Great. Final question. This is from the last guest.
Okay, cool.
And
who was the last guest?
His name is Guillaume Chalot, and he is an ex-Googler who was on the team that created the YouTube recommendation algorithm, and he's become a whistleblower in the ethical artificial intelligence space on the global scene. So his question is, in which area of life do you want to focus or be most aware right now? So where do you want to focus and or be most aware in your life?
So I think so. Confinement was tough for me. So this we call it here confinement. I think you call it lockdown, the COVID-induced state, and to get through it, I created a daily creativity practice, which is I draw or photograph something every day and share it. So I send it to my immediate family. So I think daily creativity is what I'm trying to focus on today. And that, so for me, it's drawing on the iPad. So I try and do that every day, and sharing that every day, and not worrying whether I don't need to hear anything back. So just sharing it. And that, bringing that creativity to everything. So bring it back to work and out of the house and everywhere. So that's where I'm focusing at the moment.
And now you have the talking piece, and you're going to be passing it to the next guest with a question to continue this.
Wow. So what have you done today to increase your creativity by interacting with another human being? So I've stayed up till midnight to have a podcast with a friend who lives on the other side of the world. It's been great talking to you. So another COVID project was, I educated a podcast.
Oh yeah, let's do a little PS here,
yeah.
Please.
So it's called, so the podcast is called The Lonely Pipette. And the byline is helping scientists do better science. And we are interviewing scientists, extremely accomplished biologists for the moment. And we are spending about an hour with them. And we're asking them about themselves, not about their science, not to give a lecture about molecular biology, but we're asking them to be vulnerable, to show people that they're normal people with fears and concerns and failures, and try and show that as an example to younger scientists, but also to, in some way, archive the fact that science is done by scientists, and those scientists are people. They're mothers and fathers and brothers, and they have morning practices and regrets and failures, and it's been great. It's been really so. It's also a Zoom project, and this is a fantastic medium because you're in someone else's lounge, and there's something about it, despite the frustrations of reaching out over an electronic medium. There's something about the intimacy that allows people to just talk, and people have had more time than normally. So we've had people talking, and it's going to air in October. And we're thinking of it that it's for scientists, but I'm wondering, talking to you, whether there won't be lots of there for other people. So we've interviewed about a dozen scientists. They're top achievers in their career, but they're talking about themselves, about their regrets, their failures, and about what it is to do science. So, little plug, The Lonely Pipette, launching in October.
I love it. And you're giving me great ideas for future questions, because the area of shadow is so important to shed light on holographic truth, wider spectrum, open the aperture beyond, just what's inside of, or like what's in the frame. All that's around it makes such a big difference. And so many scientific discoveries also come from necessity. Someone facing a huge personal challenge, or someone in their family facing a disease, or so much motivation comes from the personal. And you're reminding me, I listened to sermons from a church called Agape, which is universal love. And there's a pretty famous reverend who speaks. His name is Reverend Michael Beckwith. And he has a saying that is, pain pushes till vision pulls. And that's so much of where so many discoveries come from, is something's painful enough that we, put rubber to the asphalt and like get our hands dirty, or pull out the pipette and put them in the little petri dish and start mixing things, making a mess, until voila, a new interaction, a new connection, something that was opposing now converged. So I'm curious to continue having the conversation with you and others to see where things converge, and I'm so curious to turn on and to listen to your podcast, to hear from these scientists and their personal stories. I love the questions.
Thanks for joining us on Path and Purpose. Before you go, is there something you want to take with you? Perhaps a story that sparked a new thought or feeling for how you want to live closer to what matters most. Add your voice to the circle by leaving a note in the comments, and we hope you'll continue walking the path with us on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube for stories from future guests about making meaning in this emerging world. Until then, let's be safe and have fun.